Mr. President, my colleagues and I stand here today to demand accountability on behalf of the American people for the worst border crisis we've ever seen. For the past 3 years, Americans have witnessed the negligence and gross mismanagement of our southern border unfold each day worse than the day before. The consequences of this crisis has been fatal, killing 300 Americans a day, 300,000 Americans over the last 3 years due to the drugs trafficked into our homeland. It's been costly, putting an undue burden on American taxpayers to the tune of $500 billion per year. And it becomes more dangerous by the day as terrorists, Chinese nationalists, and over 1.7 million gotaways exploit our border at a rate higher than we've ever seen before. The Biden administration has, for all practical purposes, erased our southern border and embraced a structure of complete lawlessness, letting our national security hang in the balance. Enough is enough. Americans deserve better. I think everyone understands that when you're running a business, you look at the numbers, you look at the goals, and when those aren't being met, you find the problem and you address it, which brings why my colleagues and I are here today. I rise today in support of a resolution expressing the sense of the Senate that the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas no longer holds the confidence of the Senate and, more importantly, the confidence of the American people to carry out the duties of his office faithfully. Secretary Mayorkas is derelict in his duties and has failed to uphold his oath. Over the past 3 years, Secretary Mayorkas has refused to enforce immigration laws passed by Congress, fueling the invasion at our border. He entered effective border policies like catch and release, remain in Mexico, Title 42, and exploited parole and asylum loopholes that have allowed over 6 million migrants to live in the interior of our country without being vetted and with a court date nearly a decade away. With over 10 million illegal migrants entering our country under this administration's watch, not to mention the 1.7 million known gotaways, the crisis at our border is dire. Yet Mayorkas continues to lie to the American people and even under oath to Congress when he says he has operational control of our borders. Defined in the Secure Fence Act of 2006, operational control clearly means the prevention of all unlawful entries into the United States, including entries by terrorists, other unlawful aliens, instruments of terrorism, narcotics, and other contraband. That's the Secure Fence Act of 2006. To claim that he has any control, better yet, operational control as required by law, is not only disingenuous and insulting to the American people who are concerned for their safety and security, it's also illegal. And that's why Congress must step in and do the job that Joe Biden will not. Secretary Mayorkas has no control of the border. How can you when you have, again, fentanyl poisoning killing 300,000 Americans under his watch? We've had 33 months with more than 150,000 illegal boarding crossings and 19 months with more than 200,000 illegal border crossings, including a new one-month record of over 300,000 this past December, a month that historically sees a decreased number of crossers. And according to his own DHS, they've admitted they have no way to determine if these individuals have a criminal history. And sadly, the stories that aren't being told enough is that right now, Secretary Mayorkas has misplaced approximately 100,000 migrant children here in our country. I'm honored, I'm proud that so many of my colleagues would join me here today as we outline the many reasons why there's no time to waste when it comes to firing Secretary Mayorkas. And next, I'd like to recognize the senator from the great state of Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator. Secretary Mayorkas has utterly failed to secure the border, and we are less safe because of it. Every state is now a border state, and crime and deadly drugs are flowing into our communities. There's a humanitarian crisis at the border. There's a fentanyl crisis at the border. There's a national security crisis at the border, all because Secretary Mayorkas has refused to enforce the law, refused to build a border wall, and has abused the parole process illegally. I'm joining my colleagues on the floor today to express the very sincere sense of the Senate that Secretary of Homeland Security Mayorkas does not have the confidence of the Senate, and more importantly, does not have the confidence of the American people to faithfully carry out his duties. I'm sure we've all heard the statistics, but I'll reiterate a few just to illustrate how horrible the situation is right now at our southern border. Since Joe Biden took office, there's been over 7.5 million encounters nationwide and 6.2 million encounters at the southern border, in addition to 1.7 million gotaways. To put that in perspective, it's hard to put those numbers in perspective. I'm a St. Louis baseball Cardinal fan. That's 160 Busch stadiums. So for the folks who watched the Nationals championship game last night with a capacity of over 70,000, that's 116 of those stadiums. In FY23, 169 individuals whose names appear in the terrorist watch list were stopped trying to cross the U.S.-Mexico border before points of entry. In FY23, CBP arrested over 35,000 aliens with criminal convictions or outstanding warrants nationwide, including 598 known gang members, 178 of those being MS-13 members. Those are the people that we know of. In FY23, including the Air and Marine operations has seized over 27,000 pounds of fentanyl coming across the southern border, enough to kill more than 6 billion people. What gets lost in the numbers, however, is that Mayorkas hasn't just presided over the worst crisis at our southern border in our history. He is directly responsible for it. First, Secretary Mayorkas has refused to enforce real immigration law, the ones that we have right now, not proposed language, the stuff that we have right now. He rescinded the migrant protection protocols or remain in Mexico, which would require illegal immigrants to wait out their asylum claims in Mexico. This policy was working. When I was Attorney General, my previous job, we took the Biden administration to court over this, and we won just to keep that policy in place. It was a temporary injunction. We sued the administration, obtained that injunction to reinstate the program, which was upheld at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals and the United States Supreme Court. But because of the lawlessness of this administration, we actually had to go back to the district court to force them to abide by the law that they were ordered to abide by. Two, Secretary Mayorkas has similarly refused to build the border wall. Again, I sued the Biden administration and Mayorkas to force them to build the wall as the money had already been appropriated for that purpose. And while that case was still pending, at the district court level, Secretary Mayorkas and the Biden administration refused to do it, and at the same time, were selling the very materials to build that wall that were already bought. This should tell you all you need to know about how seriously they take the crisis and their willingness to follow the law. Secretary Mayorkas and Joe Biden have illegally paroled thousands of illegal immigrants into the interior of the United States. Parole authority requires that the federal government admit illegal immigrants' parole on a case-by-case basis. But Secretary Mayorkas and this president have mass paroled thousands and thousands of illegal immigrants in groups from Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. That's illegal. Right now, existing law, to do that is illegal. But they don't care. They'd rather break the law to enforce it. While Secretary Mayorkas is refusing to enforce the law and build the wall, he's outright lying to Congress in the process and thumbing his nose who would dare to suggest there's actually a crisis at the southern border. In an April 2022 House Judiciary Committee hearing, Secretary Mayorkas testified that the country had operational control of the border. That's a lie. In November of 2022 House Homeland Security hearing, Secretary Mayorkas testified that the border is secure. That's a lie. Secretary Mayorkas' record as DHS Secretary has been shameful. In his refusal to build a wall, despite being directed to do so, enforce the law of the land, he has alone in his duty, where he had the responsibility to do so, has created a crisis at the southern border and proves he is not fit for the job that he currently has. He has been derelict in his duty to secure our southern border and to protect our citizens, the people we represent, the people of this country, and has completely lost the faith of the United States Senate and the American people. Mr. President, I yield back.
Senator from Florida.
Mr. President, I'm sick and
and his administration pointing fingers at everyone but themselves for the crisis they created. And so are the American people. I've visited the border 5 times and have seen it for myself. The crisis at our border is a direct cause of Biden's dangerous and intentional policies. I've heard it from our Border Patrol agents. They're overwhelmed, and Biden has clearly abandoned them. It's sickening. President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas swore an oath to uphold the law and protect our homeland. That means securing our border. Do they do any of that? Absolutely not. That's a fact, and anyone that says it's not true is lying to you. People that we don't know, including a shocking number of single military-aged men from all over the world, are illegally crossing the border. Countless amounts of drugs are being smuggled into our country and killing Americans. And the administration says the border is secured. It's pathetic. Think about that. Possible terrorists, murders, deadly drugs are coming to our country every single day. While the President of the United States and the Secretary of Homeland Security tell us the border is secured, have they lost their minds? Do they think the American people are dumb and don't see it on their local news each and every day? I'm from an immigration state. Florida is a beautiful melting pot with people and cultures from all over the world. We love legal immigration. What we don't want is an insecure and unsecure border that allows criminals, drugs, and dangerous individuals to come into our country unchecked. More than 8 million migrants have been encountered nationwide under Joe Biden's watch. More than 8 million. Joe Biden lets them in, and then we have no idea where they are. Secretary Mayorkas is a pawn in Joe Biden's illegal immigration agenda, but he's just as guilty because he has not done his job, and he's doing it at the express direction of President Biden. Millions of people illegally crossing our border, unvetted and with no information provided to state and local officials about who is entering their cities and state. They don't tell governors, they don't tell law enforcement, they don't tell mayors anywhere where they're sending all these migrants. And when you see leaders like Texas Governor Greg Abbott doing what it takes to stop illegal immigration in his state, the Biden administration sues to stop them from enforcing the law. You can't make this stuff up. Secretary Mayorkas has abolished border security and interior enforcement at the Department of Homeland Security, but he's replaced it. He's replaced it with the largest illegal alien resettlement program in the history of our country. It is purposeful, it is intentional. This is what the Biden administration and Democrats want. We're dealing with a lawless administration that is empowered by the members of their party in the House and Senate to continue the carnage. Fentanyl is killing more than 70,000 Americans a year. But until our border is secure, this battle is not going to stop. It's going to continue. That's 70,000 families being torn apart because our border is not secured. Why would anybody do this? Our priority must be protecting American families. We've all had enough. It's time for Biden to ditch his failed policies of open borders and amnesty and secure the border now. It's also time for Secretary Mayorkas to be impeached and removed from office. And I think Joe Biden needs to be held accountable too. So I'm working on that, and we'll have more to say on that soon. I don't have any confidence in Secretary Mayorkas to carry out his duties as Secretary of Homeland Security and to protect our borders. That's why I joined the Senate resolution with many of my fellow colleagues, and I want to thank the senator from Kansas for starting this. We cannot allow this lawless administration to keep doing this without consequences. The American people deserve better. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, I come to the floor to talk about the fitness for office of Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Mr. President, my remarks are not directed at Mr. Mayorkas' character. I don't know him other than in the context of the Secretary of Homeland Security, nor do I direct my comments toward any other aspect of his life, his status as a husband, father, brother, son, neighbor, or anything else. But in this context, we have to evaluate the job that he's doing. And Mr. President, Secretary Mayorkas does not have the confidence of the United States Senate or those we represent to continue to defend our border integrity and protect our country. It's the very job he's called to do. We have to remember that we have 3 branches within our federal government, one that makes the laws, one that enforces the laws, or is supposed to, and a third that interprets them, where people disagree as to the law's meaning. His role is narrowly focused on interpreting a narrow category of laws, including and especially those designed to protect our border security. He's simply refused to enforce the laws that he's charged with administering, And under his watch, we've had at least 8 million people come into this country illegally. Over 8 million unauthorized individuals are among those that we know came in unlawfully, and the numbers keep going up. Well, we've been breaking all kinds of records, the exact wrong records to break. We broke a record just last month where we had 302,000 encounters with illegal immigrants just in December alone. Those are just the ones that we saw, that we are aware of. And that's the highest number we have ever seen in recorded history. Under the watch of Secretary Mayorkas, this administration has incentivized parents across the globe to send their young children, their young sons and their young daughters on a dangerous journey into the United States, where they end up in the hands of traffickers, where many of them end up as indentured servants, and many of them subjected to the sex trade. A substantial portion of them, a majority of them, according to some estimates, are subjected to sexual abuse, to rape, and other atrocities. More than 430,000 unaccompanied children have come into the United States illegally under his watch. Now, in the meantime, he's tried to paper over those, to make lawful entries out of those who have entered unlawfully. He's created 13 separate illegal parole programs designed to increase the flow into the country by the hundreds of thousands, trying to make illegal immigration look legal when it is not, using this parole authority that is there for a specific purpose. It's there to serve a humanitarian or a public need purpose. And it's always been understood to be something that is there only on a case-by-case basis, not categorical. In other words, if we're aware of somebody with a humanitarian purpose, somebody's grandmother has died and they need to attend the funeral in the United States, they may come in for a short period of time and then leave. If they need a certain type of medical treatment available only here, they can be paroled in for a short period of time and then they're expected to leave. The public purpose is also individualized. Somebody speaks an obscure language. Somebody's on trial for that. We need an interpreter. Can't be found inside this country. We bring someone in for a short period of time, then they leave. Always on an individualized basis, always on a temporary basis. And he's run afoul of those by creating at least 13 of these illegal parole programs. So with these kinds of numbers, how on earth can he claim to have the border under operational control? He can't. He can't, and yet somehow he does so. And to do so, he has to accept this made-up definition of operational control, the definition without any connection to actual statutory or operational requirements. On his watch, CBP has decreased its vetting procedures, those designed specifically to deal with people coming from China, including military-aged Chinese males who are crossing our southern border in unprecedented, alarming numbers. Under his watch, we've seen a dramatic increase in the known terrorists who have entered through our southern border. 279, in fact, have been caught at our southern border since Biden took office. Now, by Election Day of 2024, Mr. President, we will have seen at least 10 million illegal immigrants that will have crossed over our southern border. Under his watch, the amount of deadly fentanyl coming into this country has increased dramatically. In fact, a report out in October of 2023, just a couple of months ago, indicates that there were 6 billion, with a B, 6 billion lethal doses of fentanyl that entered our borders across our southern boundary. That, Mr. President, means that you could kill 3/4 of the entire population of the world. You could kill every American 54 times with that. This is poisoning. This is a weaponized tool that could kill Americans and is killing Americans in droves. This is not free. This is not a victimless crime. There are victims littered all over the Western Hemisphere, all over the world, but especially here in America, Mr. President. Under his watch, the administration willfully ended the carefully negotiated and very effective Remain in Mexico program put in place by the previous administration, which required those seeking asylum crossing on land through our southern border to wait in Mexico, to await final disposition of their asylum claims during the adjudication of those claims here in the United States. They just ended it. Then they litigated it. Then they were told by a court to reinstitute it. And then they've been drawing that out in a rope-a-dope fashion. Under his watch, the administration has decreased willfully its ability to detain those required by statute to be detained, even though illegal entries have increased dramatically. A recent CBS poll found that 75% of Americans say that the situation across the southern border is a crisis, or at least very serious. The House Judiciary Committee report stated that between January 20th of 2021, the day Biden took office, and March 31st of last year, the Biden administration removed from the United States only 5,993 illegal aliens who were placed in removal proceedings before an immigration judge during that time. In other words, let's think about what this means. Of the at least 2.1 million aliens released into the United States since January 20th, 2021, the Biden administration has failed to remove, through immigration court removal proceedings, 99.7% of those illegal aliens. Mr. President, it's a new day, it's 2024, and Secretary Mayorkas, just as he has had all along, still has the legal authority to enforce the border. But he still refuses to do so. The crisis at our southern border, Mr. President, make no mistake, is not the consequence of inadequate statutory text. It is not for want of legislative authority. He has that authority just as the previous president did, but unlike the previous administration, this administration refuses willfully to enforce it. I find it ironic and counterproductive, Mr. President, the United States Senate continues to negotiate with Secretary Mayorkas on border security issues, even as he refuses, as he has done from the very beginning, to enforce the border, creating this humanitarian crisis, and even as he is facing, as a result of that, impeachment proceedings in the House of Representatives, even as we speak. We found him not to be capable of negotiating in good faith on this. Why? Because he refuses to enforce existing law, which, if he did enforce it, would bring this crisis to an end abruptly. The crisis at our southern border, and it is a crisis, is unacceptable. Americans are demanding accountability. We must fire Secretary Mayorkas. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Secretary, Senator from Indiana.
The laws that govern who can enter this country are some of our most important. Those laws, from the time President Biden got elected, have been completely ignored. And his point person, Secretary Mayorkas, has been the leading individual, saying one thing, doing another. You've heard the statistics: 8 million illegal immigrants, gotaways, not even a term a few years ago, up to around 60,000 per month. And in that crowd, these are not people that are wanting to greet someone at the border. They pay the big fees to the cartels. They want to come into the country, and they're doing so with some type of record that they don't want to be discussing it once they get here. Who knows where that ends up? I was down there in 2021, I think April, and it was not currently where most of the traffic's coming from, Eagle Pass. It was down a little bit east of there. And those numbers, 50, 60,000 per month, are now dwarfed by 200 to 300,000 monthly, plus the gotaways again that come in here not wanting to greet the Border Patrol. It is not secure. Back then, Border Patrol said their job is basically triage. They are so overwhelmed. We should today pass this no confidence measure because there's been plenty of time to adjust your policies. And when you only do it because you're paying the political consequences that will be meted out here next November, I don't think that counts. That means you're doing it thinking that you can maneuver beyond it politically when you've caused all that grief in the meantime. The leader of the band is President Biden. He's the conductor. Mayorkas has just been in the orchestra, but it's clearly been orchestrated where we're at. When you put up the welcome sign, come into our country with no consequences, Sooner or later, it adds up. There will be consequences. Even our northern border has got more illegal crossings than we've ever had before. Down there a couple years ago, 50 different nationalities were crossing. Now it's up to over 150. 170 on the terror watch list have been confronted. How many others were not? This is a dire national security threat. Those who are ignoring the problem for political reasons should bear that in mind. And most importantly, the American public should bear that in mind when they go to the ballot box next November. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Senator Marshall for the work that he has done on this resolution, and I come to the floor today to support this resolution for a very simple reason. When you look at the job performance of Secretary Mayorkas, you have to say he indeed has failed. He is a Secretary of Homeland Security who clearly does not believe in securing the homeland, because the border policy for the Biden administration, which he is implementing, is for an open border. You can see it for yourself. You can look at the news reports. People are streaming across that open border between the ports of entry. They are coming into this country illegally. And this administration, this Secretary of Homeland Security, they keep trying to be creative and find ways to make illegal legal. That is wrong. So the Secretary has failed in his duty to secure that border. And as he has failed in those duties, he has also failed our Border Patrol agents. When you go to the border, as many of us have, what you hear from Border Patrol agents, what you see on the ground, is Border Patrol agents who are struggling to combat what is a crisis at our southern border, and it's all because of this administration's policies. In addition, Secretary Mayorkas has failed the communities across this country because they are suffering with record fentanyl overdoses, with drug trafficking, human trafficking, sex trafficking, and it is our local law enforcement that is having to address these issues. The Secretary has failed them because he failed in his job, and he has failed the American people who trusted him to go in and secure the homeland. But no, that is not what has happened. So House Republicans are going to proceed with their impeachment against the Secretary, and hopefully that is going to be the first step toward ending this record of failure, which is really costing the American people greatly. You've heard much about the numbers today. And yes, indeed, you've got 8.5 million illegal entrants into this country. Now, 1.7 million of those are what we call known gotaways. That means they can see them on surveillance, they can't get to them. There is a category of unknown gotaways that they find after the fact. We do not know who is entering this country, but what we do know is this population of illegal entry into this country is more than the population of 38 of our states. There are hundreds of individuals on the terror watch list who have been caught at our southern border. They walked in illegally and tried to claim asylum. So far, this fiscal year, which began on October 1, we have had 30 terrorists come to our border. Why is it that they are doing this, Mr. President? They're doing it because they think they can get away with it. They think we're not going to do anything to them, that we're going to let them sashay right on into this country and welcome them. Give them a plane ticket to where they want to go. Give them a cell phone. Give them food. Give them housing. That is what they're expecting because of this failed border policy. Now, sometimes you hear some of my colleagues across the aisle say, well, the border's been broken for years. It hasn't been this bad. You didn't have 302,000 people in a month. You didn't even have that in a year. You also didn't have terrorists by the hundreds. If you go back and look at how many terrorists tried to come up to our border between 2017 and 2020, there were 11. So far this fiscal year, we've had 30. You just heard my colleague give you the stat of 279 since Joe Biden raised his hand and took the oath of office. This is the reason that our FBI director, Christopher Wray, says everywhere he looks, not just some places, but everywhere he looks. Is he seeing peace and calm? No. He says he sees red lights flashing. Think about that. Red lights flashing. Dozens of terrorists, hundreds of people from countries of interest, thousands of gang members and criminals are walking into this country. They're not coming here for a job. They're coming here because crime is what they know. This is the reason that Alejandro Mayorkas has failed in his job. Now, we've talked a little bit about fentanyl, and since Joe Biden took office, we have had 50,000 pounds of fentanyl that has come into this country being seized at that border between the ports of entry, 50,000 pounds. And fentanyl death is now the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. You know, Mr. President, we could do something about this if there was the political will in Congress to do something about it. When you look at the fact that our federal agents tell us they think they're only catching 5 to 10% of the drugs that are coming into this country, and we lost over 100,000 Americans last year to drug overdoses. About 70% of that was fentanyl. Some of it was opioids. We need to do something about this. Securing that border would go a long way. Supporting our Border Patrol instead of blaming them, that would go a long way. I thank the gentleman from Kansas for bringing forward this resolution. It is time that Alejandro Mayorkas be removed from his position as the Secretary of Homeland Security.
Mr. President.
Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank my colleagues for joining me tonight to help me prosecute this case against Secretary Mayorkas. As we introduce this historic measure, I want to close with this. You have nothing if you don't have your word. As a physician, I took an oath to, above all else, do no harm. In the military, I took an oath to support and defend our Constitution. In the Senate, I reaffirmed my military oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. Each one of these oaths I honored with integrity and exercise to the best of my ability. On February 2nd, 2021, Secretary Mayorkas swore an oath to, and I quote, "well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office of which I'm about to enter, and to protect our country from enemies, domestic and foreign." With that oath, he promised the American people that he would defend our homeland and uphold our constitutions. Tonight, my colleagues and I have outlined numerous ways Secretary Mayorkas is derelict in his duty as Secretary and failed to uphold this oath. Mr. President, we're here today because we take our oath seriously and will not stand by idly while Secretary Mayorkas threatens our national security and our democracy. For the sake of America's safety and security, we need to impeach Secretary Mayorkas now and send a clear message to Joe Biden. In 300 days, we'll fire him too. Mr. President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee be discharged from further consideration and the Senate now proceed to Senate Resolution 169. I further ask that the resolution be agreed to, the Marshall Amendment to the preamble, which is at the desk, be agreed to, the preamble as amended be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from Delaware.
Thank you. I want to thank my colleague who's joining me here on the floor this evening for his service to our country. Like him, I was just a pup. I was 17 years old when I raised my right hand and took an oath to defend our country and Constitution as a midshipman, Navy, ROTC midshipman at the height of the Vietnam War. And I went on to repeat that oath, gosh, a dozen or more times, active duty and reserve duty through the heart of the Cold War, right up to today, and took the same oath here not too many years ago. It's an oath I take seriously, and I know my colleagues do as well. I have had the opportunity to travel to the borders of our country, south of us, and any number of countries south of Mexico, all the way down to Colombia. And I have a pretty good idea why people, especially from that part of the world, have come here or sought to come to this country in enormous numbers. And among the reasons why they come here is because we are addicted to drugs. We are drugs that are in many cases trafficked through the countries to the south of us. And people end up living lives of misery because of our addiction to drugs, illegal drugs. And the folks who live down there, they just want to live in a place where they can, their children get an education and have access to health care and freedom from crime and corruption. That's what they're interested in. And because of our addiction to drugs, we help make the situation worse for them. On top of that, the poverty that is faced in a bunch of places down in Central America especially is made worse because of drought. A drought which is caused in no small cause, as our presiding officer knows, because of the reliance in this country of greenhouse gases, creating greenhouse gases that have put so many other places, including to countries south of us, in harm's way. But the challenges in our border today are the results of any number of things. Global pandemic, increased violence, corruption, authoritarian government rule, and on and on. These are issues that we have sought to help address for as long as I can remember, under numerous secretaries of Homeland Security and administrations of both parties. I've had the privilege of serving on the Committee on Homeland Security for the 22 years that I've been in the Senate. Had the privilege of leading the committee as chairman of the committee for a number of years, and have led congressional delegations, bipartisan congressional delegations, to the areas south of us. This illegal immigration that we're seeing in the south of our country is unacceptable, and it's unsustainable. And anyone who says it's otherwise is, I think, is mistaken. The question is, what do we do about it? And I've known Ali Mayorkas for the better part of a dozen years. He is a good and decent man, a wonderful family, wife, children, and someone who deserves our thanks, not the back of our hand. None of us are perfect. God knows I'm not. And certainly he has made mistakes. But if you talk to the people who are actually involved in negotiations, the bipartisan negotiations, are trying to find a solution with respect to border and as part of the supplemental appropriation legislation. If you talk to the people that are involved, Democrats and Republicans that are involved, ask them about how helpful or harmful is the involvement in Ali Mayorkas. He's been very much involved in those conversations. And what I've heard back off the record from our colleagues, Democrat and Republican, he actually has played a constructive role and a helpful role, and they hope that he'll continue to do that. If I had a magic wand, Mr. President, with one swell swoop, I'd do one thing to help address the illegal immigration. I would have I would enact immigration reform, comprehensive immigration reform. Next Monday, I'll be one of the speakers at the annual State of Delaware Chamber of Commerce dinner, and something I've done for, gosh, dozens of years now. But when I make customer calls, I visit customer calls to businesses large and small around our country, and I always ask them three questions. How are you doing? How are we doing? Our congressional delegation, Senator Coons, Congresswoman Blunt Rochester, and myself. How are we doing, and what can we do to help? You know what most people say, most businesses say? Our real challenge is just getting people to come to work. That's what I hear from all kinds of businesses, large and small. We just need people to come to work. People have a work ethic, people are trainable, and we can count on it. They'll show up every day. There's a lot of people who like to come to this country and work. They don't necessarily want to stay here and live here and become citizens here. They just want to have the opportunity to provide a better life for their folks and make a contribution in this country. So I would want you, rather than simply laying all this problems that we have at the border at the foot of one person, does the Secretary deserve some, is he responsible for it? Sure, so are we. And one of the things that we could do is to adopt comprehensive immigration reform, which the business community in my state has asked us to do for years. And across the country, they've asked us to do that for years. If we did just that one thing, that would make a difference. But the Department of Homeland Security has a bunch of missions, some of them more critical than others. And one of those is to protect our nation from harm, whether the threat is a natural disaster or an act of terror. This is a difficult mission under any circumstances, and one that requires a strong, principled leadership, and I think we get that from Ali Mayorkas. Moreover, our border has seen significant changes in demographics and populations of those seeking asylums. The people coming across our border trying to get into this country look a whole lot different than the first delegations that I led down there as a United States Senator, a junior senator here in this body. It's changed a lot. And we need to change the ways that we're trying to stem it. I'll close this. I think most of us here, and I know my colleague who's offering this unanimous request, people of faith. We are people of faith. And we might be Democrats and Republicans, but we're also people of faith for the most part. And we might be Protestant, we might be Catholic, might be Jew, Muslim, Hindu, whatever, but we're people of faith. And I was raised in Beckley, West Virginia, a little coal mining town. And Mom used to take my sister and me to church, God, every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night, most Thursday nights. And she was interested in two things. One, making sure we understood the golden rule, treat other people the way we want to be treated. and two, that we had actually read Matthew 25 and actually internalized it. Our obligation, our moral obligation to the least of these. You remember there in the scripture it says in Matthew 25, when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was thirsty, did you give me to drink? When I was naked, did you clothe me? It also says this, it says, when I was a stranger in your land, did you welcome me? Think about that. When I was a stranger in your land, did you welcome me? And we have a moral obligation to welcome the stranger. We don't have a moral obligation to let millions of people come into our country without permission and to stay here. That's not part of Matthew 25. But there is a moral obligation that we need to look out for the least of these. I hope we'll keep that in the back of my mind as we go forward. The last thing I would say, I've said this so many times, my colleagues are sick of hearing it, but the bipartisan solutions are lasting solutions. I'm a Democrat raised by two Republican parents. I've always believed that the way to get things done is to work together across the aisle. I'm encouraged by the negotiations that are underway that involve several of our colleagues on Democrat and Republican side addressing what's going on at the border. I think, and I've talked to both Democrats and Republicans who have been part of those conversations, those negotiations, and I'm encouraged that progress is being made. And I think rather than us just pointing fingers at one another, but actually to build on that progress and hasten the day that we can actually begin in a serious way, in a comprehensive way, resolve this major challenge to our country. And with that, I object.
Mr. President?
Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, I greatly appreciate the...
Objection is heard. Okay. Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, I certainly greatly appreciate the Senator from Delaware's remarks. And I agree with him on so many things he talked about. I agree that we are a land of opportunity, that we should help those in need. You know, personally, I've led humanitarian medical mission trips around the world. The United States spends $80 billion a year through the USAID programs, Food for Peace, polio vaccinations. We promote economic trade. I'm afraid my friends across the aisle see this as an immigration issue. If we open up the gates, 158 million people worldwide would like to come into the country right now, to come into our country. 158 million people, that's according to a 2018 Gallup poll. 158 million people from around the world would flood our gates right now if given the opportunity. And I've always supported legal immigration. But I see this today totally as a national security issue. That's what I'm afraid of. That's what I'm concerned about. When the FBI director says all the lights are blinking, when we see 100,000 people, Americans, young Americans mostly dying from fentanyl poisoning every year, when we have 1.7 million gotaways where we don't know who they are or where they are, hundreds of known terrorists, aliens of interest, tens of thousands of aliens of interest. This is a national security issue to us. Secretary Mayorkas took an oath. He took an oath to enforce the laws of the land, to make sure that we had a secure border. And we don't have that right now, Mr. President. And that's why we need to fire Secretary Mayorkas today, and we need to let the White House know that we're going to have a new person in there next year as well. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.